My son sold their house and gave $620,000 for my daughter-in-law to spend. Then they came to live in my house. I answered, "No." My daughter-in-law slapped me across the face. That very same day, I called my lawyer. When they received the subpoena, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Bessie, and at 64, I thought I knew my son. I thought I understood the man I raised, the boy I sacrificed everything for. But that Tuesday morning in October changed everything I believed about family, loyalty, and the child I brought into this world. I was in my garden, tending to my late-blooming roses, when I heard the car pull into my driveway. The engine sound was familiar, Terrence's SUV, but something felt different. There was an urgency in the way the doors slammed, a tension I could sense even from my backyard. When I walked around to the front of my modest two-story home, I found my son standing on my porch with his wife Lennox. But they weren't carrying the usual signs of a casual visit. Lennox had 2 large suitcases beside her, and Terrence was pulling more bags from the trunk. "Mom," Terrence called out, his voice strained. "We need to talk." I wiped my hands on my gardening apron, studying their faces. Terrence looked exhausted, his usually neat appearance disheveled. His tie was crooked, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Lennox, on the other hand, stood perfectly composed in her designer outfit, her blonde hair styled to perfection despite the early hour. "What's going on?" I asked, unlocking my front door. "Is everything all right?" They followed me inside, their footsteps echoing on my hardwood floors. I noticed Lennox's sharp eyes scanning my living room, taking inventory of my furniture, my decorations, as if calculating something. "Mom, we have something to tell you," Terrence began, settling heavily into my old recliner, the same chair where his father used to sit before he passed 5 years ago. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot I'd made earlier, my hands steady despite the growing unease in my chest. "I'm listening." Terrence glanced at Lennox, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. "We sold the house." The words hung in the air like smoke. I set my coffee cup down carefully, the ceramic making a soft clink against the saucer. "Which house?" I asked, though something deep in my stomach already knew the answer. "Our house," he said. "The one on Maple Street. The one on Maple Street. The beautiful colonial I had helped them buy. The house where I'd contributed $40,000 from my retirement savings for the down payment. The house where I'd spent countless weekends helping them renovate, painting walls until my back ached, planting the garden that Lennox never appreciated." "You sold it?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Why didn't you tell me you were thinking about selling?" Lennox spoke for the first time since entering my home. "We didn't need permission, Bessie. It's our house." Her tone was cool, matter of fact, but there was something else there, something that made my skin crawl. "I understand it's your house," I said carefully, "but we discussed your plans to stay there long term. You said it was perfect for raising the kids you wanted to have." Terrence shifted uncomfortably. "Plans change, Mom." "How much did you get for it?" I asked. $620,000, Lennox answered before Terrence could speak. There was something almost gleeful in her voice, like she was sharing exciting news. My breath caught. $620,000. It was more than I'd made in the last 10 years of working before retirement. "That's wonderful," I managed. "So where are you moving? Did you find a bigger place? Somewhere in a better school district?" The silence that followed was deafening. Terrence stared at his hands. Lennox examined her perfectly manicured nails. "Actually, Mom," Terrence finally said, "we were hoping we could stay here, with you, just temporarily, while we figure things out." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "Stay here?" "It would just be for a little while," he rushed to explain. "Maybe a few months, we wouldn't be any trouble." "But what happened to the money from the sale?" I asked. Another silence. This one felt heavier, more dangerous. "Well," Lennox said, smoothing her skirt, "I had some expenses, things I needed to take care of." "What kind of expenses?" "Personal things," she said, her tone suggesting the conversation was over. But I wasn't ready to let it go. Lennox, you just sold a house for over $600,000. What could possibly— I bought some jewelry, she interrupted, and some clothes. I got my car detailed and upgraded the interior. I also took a spa trip to California with my sister. Oh, and I paid off my credit cards. I stared at her, waiting for her to continue, to explain where the rest of the money went. When she didn't, I felt something cold settle in my chest. How much jewelry? I asked quietly. Does it matter? Lennox snapped. It was my money to spend. Your money? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Terrence finally looked up at me. Mom, please. We just need a place to stay while we get back on our feet. Get back on your feet? I repeated. Terrence, you just had over $500,000. How are you not on your feet? It's complicated, he mumbled. I looked between my son and his wife, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. Terrence, my boy who I'd raised to be responsible, to think before acting, was sitting in my living room homeless, despite having just had more money than most people see in a lifetime. And Lennox, who had never worked a day since marrying my son, was sitting there in what looked like a brand new outfit that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Where did all the money go, Lennox? I asked again, my voice firmer this time. She rolled her eyes. I told you, I had expenses. $620,000 worth of expenses. It's not your business, Bessie. Something snapped inside me. It became my business when you showed up at my door asking for a place to live. Terrence put his head in his hands. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be? I stood up, my coffee forgotten. Terrence, help me understand this. You had a beautiful house, money in the bank, and now you're asking to move in with your 64-year-old mother because your wife spent it all on jewelry and spa trips? It wasn't just jewelry and spa trips, Lennox said defensively. I had debts to pay off. What debts? Credit card debts. How much? She glared at me. Enough. I felt like I was drowning. Terrence, look at me. My son raised his head and I saw something in his eyes that broke my heart. He looked defeated, embarrassed, but also resigned, like he'd given up fighting long ago. How much debt did she have? I asked him directly. Mom, how much, Terrence? He sighed deeply. About $80,000. $80,000 in credit card debt. I felt dizzy. What did she buy with $80,000 on credit cards? Clothes, mostly, he said quietly. Shoes, handbags, vacations before we were married, and the rest of the money from the house? Terrence looked at Lennox, who was now studying her phone as if this conversation didn't concern her. She wanted to redecorate her sister's house as a surprise, he said, and she bought a new car for her mother, and she wanted to invest in her friend's business. What kind of business? A boutique, Lennox said without looking up from her phone. It's going to be very successful. How much did you invest? $300,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $300,000 invested in a friend's boutique by a woman who had never run a business, never held a job, never shown any interest in anything beyond shopping and spa treatments. So let me get this straight, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You sold your house for $620,000. $80,000 went to pay off Lennox's credit card debts. $300,000 went to invest in her friend's boutique. What happened to the rest? I told you, Lennox said, finally looking up from her phone with irritation. I had expenses. The jewelry, the spa trips, the car detailing, some furniture for the boutique, gifts for my family. Things add up. I calculated quickly in my head. Even being generous with her expenses, there should have been at least $50,000 left, maybe more. Where's the rest of the money? I asked. There is no rest, Lennox said. It's gone. Gone. Over $600,000. Gone in a matter of months on jewelry, spa trips, credit card debts, and a boutique investment that I was willing to bet would never see a profit. I sank back into my chair, feeling every one of my 64 years settling into my bones. This wasn't just about money. This was about the son I'd raised, the values I'd tried to instill in him, and the woman who had somehow convinced him to throw it all away. So now you want to live here, I said. Just temporarily, Terrence repeated. I looked around my small home. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a tiny kitchen. I'd worked for 30 years to pay off this house, to have a place that was mine, where I could live out my retirement in peace. And what's your plan? I asked. How do you intend to get back on your feet? Terrence and Lennox exchanged a look. Well, Lennox said, Terrence will keep working, obviously. And I'm sure the boutique will start turning a profit soon. And if it doesn't, she shrugged, then we'll figure something else out. I stared at this woman who had convinced my son to sell his house and spend over $500,000 in a few months, and who was now sitting in my living room with the casual confidence of someone who expected to be taken care of. No, I said quietly. What? Terrence looked up sharply. I said no. You can't stay here. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The word no hung in the air between us like a challenge. I watched my son's face crumble, but it was Lennox's reaction that truly unsettled me. Her perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Mom, you can't be serious, Terrence said, his voice rising. We're family. Yes, we are family, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Which is why I'm not going to enable this disaster you've created. Lennox set her phone down on my coffee table with deliberate force. Enable what disaster, Bessie? My husband made a business decision. Not every investment pays off immediately. Business decision? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. Spending $600,000 on jewelry, spa trips, and your friend's boutique is not a business decision, Lennox. It's reckless spending. How dare you judge how I spend my money? She snapped, her composure finally cracking. It wasn't your money, I said quietly. It was the equity in a house that my son worked for, that I helped purchase. Terrence stood up abruptly, pacing to my front window. Mom, we wouldn't ask if we had anywhere else to go. What about Lennox's family? Surely her parents live in a 1-bedroom condo, Terrence said, and her sister doesn't have room. The sister whose house she spent thousands redecorating as a surprise? Lennox's eyes flashed with anger. My personal relationships are none of your concern. I stood up, my patience finally exhausted. They became my concern the moment you showed up at my door asking for help. You spent my son's future on frivolous nonsense, and now you expect me to clean up the mess. It's not frivolous, Lennox shouted, jumping to her feet. You wouldn't understand. You've lived in this tiny house your whole life, wearing the same old clothes, driving the same old car. You don't know what it's like to have standards. The insult hit its mark, but I refused to show it. No, Lennox. I don't know what it's like to spend other people's money on luxuries while expecting them to provide me with housing when the money runs out. Terrence turned from the window, his face flushed. Mom, please. I know Lennox made some mistakes. Some mistakes? I interrupted. Terrence, she spent over $600,000 in a few months. This isn't some mistake. This is a pattern of behavior. You don't know anything about our marriage, Lennox hissed. You don't know what it's like to be married to someone who never wants to spend money on anything nice. I know what it's like to live within my means, I replied. I know what it's like to save for the things I want instead of expecting others to pay for them. Lennox's face twisted with rage. Well, aren't you just perfect, Bessie? The perfect mother who raised the perfect son who married the wrong woman. I never said that. You didn't have to. It's written all over your face every time you look at me. The truth was, she was partially right. I had never liked Lennox, from the moment Terrence brought her home 3 years ago. But it wasn't because of her background or her appearance. It was because of moments like this, when her mask slipped and revealed the entitled, manipulative person underneath. Lennox, I said carefully, I don't dislike you because of who you are. I dislike the choices you make and how they affect my son. Your son is a grown man who makes his own choices, she shot back. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you make all the choices and he just goes along with them. Terrence finally spoke up, his voice strained. Mom, that's not fair. Isn't it? I turned to him. Tell me, Terrence, whose idea was it to sell the house? He hesitated. It was. We discussed it together. Whose idea was it to invest $300,000 in a boutique? Another hesitation. Lennox thought it was a good opportunity. Whose idea was it to spend $80,000 paying off credit card debts that you didn't even know existed until after you were married? Terrence's face reddened. Mom, please. Answer the question, Terrence. Who's been making the financial decisions in your marriage? We make them together, he said weakly. Lennox laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off my living room walls. Oh, please. Terrence, tell your mother the truth. Tell her how you begged me to marry you. Tell her how grateful you were that someone like me would even look at someone like you. I felt my blood run cold. Someone like you. Yes, Lennox said, her voice dripping with venom. Someone beautiful, someone sophisticated, someone who could have had any man she wanted. Your son knows he hit the lottery when he married me. I looked at Terrence, waiting for him to defend himself, to show some backbone. Instead, he stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped in defeat. And now, Lennox continued, when we need help, his own mother turns her back on us. What kind of mother does that? The kind who won't watch her son be destroyed by a manipulative woman, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. That's when Lennox crossed the line. You bitter old woman, she screamed. You're just jealous because your son chose me over you. You can't stand that he loves me more than he loves his pathetic, lonely mother. Lennox, stop, Terrence said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, I won't stop. She needs to hear this. You're a miserable old lady living in a run-down house, jealous of everyone who has more than you do. Well, guess what, Bessie? Your son doesn't need you anymore. He has me. I felt something snap inside me. All the years of biting my tongue, of trying to be diplomatic, of watching this woman slowly poison my relationship with my son, it all came crashing down. Get out, I said quietly. What? I said, get out of my house. Lennox laughed. You can't throw us out. We have nowhere to go. That's not my problem. Mom, Terrence pleaded, please reconsider. We really have nowhere else. You should have thought of that before you let your wife spend your entire future on jewelry and spa treatments. Lennox stepped closer to me, her face twisted with fury. You don't get to talk to me like that in front of my husband. This is my house, I said firmly. I'll talk to you however I want, and right now, I want you to leave. We're not going anywhere, Lennox said, crossing her arms. Terrence, tell your mother we're staying. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to stand up for what was right, to protect the people he loved. Instead, I saw a broken person who had let his wife walk all over him for so long that he didn't remember how to fight back. Terrence, I said softly, please ask your wife to leave my home. He looked between us, his face anguished. Mom, please. Just let us stay for a few days while we figure something out. No. That's when Lennox lost whatever remaining composure she had. Fine, she screamed. You want to be a selfish, heartless bitch? Then we'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of mother you are. She stormed toward my front door, yanking it open so hard it banged against the wall. My neighbors, Mrs. Patterson from across the street and the Johnsons from next door, were outside in their yards. They looked up at the commotion. You want to know what kind of woman Bessie Mitchell really is? Lennox shouted, her voice carrying across the quiet street. She's throwing her own son out on the street, her own flesh and blood. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment as neighbors stopped what they were doing to stare at the scene unfolding on my front porch. Lennox, please, Terrence said, finally showing some backbone. But it was too late. No, she screamed. Let them all know. This woman raised a son who worked his whole life to buy a beautiful home, and when life got a little difficult, when we needed help, she slammed the door in our faces. Mrs. Patterson took a step closer, clearly trying to hear every word. We asked for temporary help, Lennox continued, tears now streaming down her face, tears I was sure were completely calculated, just a place to stay while we got back on our feet, and this heartless woman said no to her own child. I stood in my doorway, watching this performance, feeling more humiliated than I had in years. My quiet street, where I'd lived for 15 years, where my neighbors respected me, was now witness to this spectacle. That's enough, I said, stepping out onto my porch. No, it's not enough. Lennox whirled around to face me. You think you're so much better than everyone else, but you're just a selfish old woman who can't stand to see other people happy. Lennox, stop this right now. Why? Because you're embarrassed? Good. You should be embarrassed. That's when she did something that changed everything. In front of my neighbors, in front of God and everyone, Lennox Mitchell raised her hand and slapped me across the face. The sound echoed across the quiet street like a gunshot. I staggered back, my hand flying to my cheek, more from shock than pain. For a moment, nobody moved. Even Lennox seemed surprised by what she'd done. Mrs. Patterson gasped audibly. The Johnsons' teenage son, who had been mowing their lawn, shut off the mower and stared. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, to show some outrage that his wife had just assaulted his mother. Instead, Terrence stood there looking confused and overwhelmed. "Did you just hit me?" I asked quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Lennox lifted her chin defiantly. "You deserved it. Throwing your own family out on the street like common trash." I looked around at my neighbors, all of them witnessing this humiliation. Mrs. Patterson looked horrified. The Johnsons were whispering to each other. Even the mail carrier had stopped his truck to watch. "Terrence," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "your wife just assaulted me in front of the entire neighborhood." He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. "And you're going to stand there and let her." "Mom, she's upset. She didn't mean to slap me in the face?" Lennox stepped between us. "Don't try to make this about you being a victim, Bessie. You brought this on yourself." I stared at this woman who had just humiliated me in front of my neighbors, who had convinced my son to throw away his financial future, and who was now trying to make me the villain in her twisted narrative. "Get off my property," I said quietly. "Make me," Lennox sneered. I looked at my son one last time, hoping to see some sign that he would stand up to her, that he would choose right over wrong. Instead, I saw a man who had been so thoroughly manipulated that he couldn't even defend his own mother from physical assault. "You have 5 minutes to get your bags and get off my property," I said. "If you're not gone by then, I'm calling the police." "You wouldn't dare," Lennox said, but I could see uncertainty creeping into her eyes. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed 911. As the phone rang, I watched Lennox's face change from defiance to panic. She grabbed Terrence's arm. "Tell your mother to hang up that phone right now," she hissed. But I was already talking to the dispatcher, giving my address, explaining that I needed an officer to help remove trespassers from my property who had become violent. When I hung up, Lennox was staring at me in disbelief. "You actually called the police on your own son?" "No," I said calmly. "I called the police on the woman who just assaulted me in front of witnesses." For the first time since I'd known her, Lennox Mitchell looked genuinely afraid. The police arrived within 10 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. Officer Martinez was a young woman, maybe in her early 30s, with kind eyes and a professional demeanor that immediately put me at ease. Officer Thompson, her partner, was older, probably close to my age, with gray temples and the weary look of someone who'd seen too much family drama over the years. By the time they arrived, Lennox had managed to compose herself somewhat. She'd stopped crying and fixed her hair, but I could see the panic still lurking in her eyes. Terrence stood beside his luggage looking like a lost child. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said, approaching me first. "We received a call about an assault?" "Yes," I said, pointing to my still stinging cheek. "This woman slapped me." Officer Thompson looked at Lennox. "Is this true, ma'am?" "She was being unreasonable," Lennox said, as if that justified physical violence. "We just needed a place to stay temporarily, and she threw us out like we were strangers." "That doesn't give you the right to hit anyone," Officer Martinez said firmly. "Ma'am," she turned back to me, "do you want to press charges?" I looked at my son, standing there with his head down, saying nothing in my defense. This man I had raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally, and he couldn't even condemn his wife for hitting his mother. "Yes," I said quietly. "I want to press charges." Lennox's face went white. "You can't be serious." "Assault is a serious charge, ma'am," Officer Thompson said. "We have multiple witnesses who saw you strike Mrs. Mitchell." Indeed, my neighbors were still standing in their yards, watching the drama unfold. Mrs. Patterson nodded vigorously when Officer Martinez looked in her direction. "I saw the whole thing," Mrs. Patterson called out. She hit Bessie right across the face, unprovoked. "This is ridiculous," Lennox protested. "She's my mother-in-law. This is a family dispute." "Family or not," Officer Martinez said, "assault is assault. You'll need to come with us." As they led Lennox toward the patrol car, she turned back to Terrence. "Don't just stand there. Do something." But Terrence seemed frozen, watching his wife being arrested on his mother's front lawn. He looked at me with something that might have been accusation. "Mom, did you really have to?" "Yes," I said before he could finish. "I really had to. Your wife assaulted me in front of the entire neighborhood, and you stood there and did nothing. She's my wife, and I'm your mother, but apparently that doesn't mean anything anymore." Officer Thompson approached with a clipboard. "Mrs. Mitchell, we'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. Can you do that this afternoon?" "Of course." As the police car pulled away with Lennox in the back seat, Terrence loaded his luggage back into his SUV. He moved slowly, like a man in shock. "Where will you go?" I asked, despite everything. He shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe a hotel for tonight." "With what money?" The question hung in the air between us. We both knew he couldn't afford a hotel indefinitely. We both knew this was just the beginning of his problems. "Terrence," I said softly, "this doesn't have to be the end. If you leave her, if you admit that this whole situation is wrong, we can work through this." He looked at me with tired eyes. "She's my wife, Mom. I can't just abandon her." "She abandoned you the moment she spent your future on jewelry and spa trips." "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is. It's exactly that simple." He climbed into his SUV without another word and drove away, leaving me standing on my front porch feeling more alone than I had since my husband died. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I gave my statement at the police station, detailing not just the assault, but the entire confrontation. The officer taking my statement, Detective Reynolds, was thorough and professional. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said when we were finished, "I have to ask, is this the first time your daughter-in-law has been physically aggressive with you?" I considered the question. "Yes, physically, but she's been emotionally manipulative for years. Can you elaborate on that?" I told her about the gradual isolation from my son, how Lennox always seemed to schedule their visits during times she knew I couldn't make it, how she'd convinced Terrence to skip family gatherings and holidays. I explained how she'd slowly turned my son against me, making him believe that his mother was overly critical and interfering. "And the financial situation?" Detective Reynolds asked. "You mentioned that they sold their house and spent the money." "Over $600,000, I said. "Gone in a matter of months." Detective Reynolds whistled low. "That's a lot of money to go through that quickly. She has expensive tastes and no concept of living within her means. And your son went along with this?" I sighed. "My son has been completely manipulated by this woman. He can't see what she's doing to him, to his future, to our family." That evening, alone in my house, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and really thought about my situation for the first time. Pressing charges against Lennox was just the beginning. She would be back. They would both be back. And next time, they might not be so direct about their demands. I thought about the house on Maple Street, the one I'd helped them buy. $40,000 from my retirement savings, money I'd worked decades to accumulate, money that had essentially been flushed away along with the rest of their equity. But then I remembered something. When they'd bought the house, there had been paperwork. Lots of paperwork. And because I'd contributed such a significant portion of the down payment, the real estate attorney had insisted on certain protections. I went to my file cabinet and pulled out the folder labeled Terrence House Purchase. Inside were copies of all the documents from the sale, including something I'd nearly forgotten about, a promissory note. The attorney had insisted on it when I'd given them the $40,000. "Mrs. Mitchell," he'd said at the time, "I strongly recommend that this be structured as a loan rather than a gift. It protects your interests and ensures that your son understands the gravity of accepting such a large sum." At the time, I'd protested. I didn't want to make it alone. I wanted to help my son. But Terrence himself had insisted. "Mom, I want to pay you back. This should be official." The promissory note was clear. $40,000 to be repaid at 5% annual interest, with payments beginning 1 year after the purchase date. The loan was secured by the property itself, meaning I had a legal interest in the house. But they'd sold the house without paying me back, without even mentioning the outstanding loan. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for James Crawford, the attorney who'd handled the original purchase. His secretary told me he could see me the next morning. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Terrence as a little boy, how he used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, how proud he'd been when he'd graduated from college, how he'd cried at his father's funeral and promised he'd always take care of me. Where had that boy gone? How had he become this man who stood silent while his wife assaulted his mother? The next morning, I dressed carefully in my best suit and drove to James Crawford's office. He was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded respect. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "I was sorry to hear about your troubles. Please sit down and tell me what's happened." I explained the entire situation, the house sale, the squandered money, the assault, the arrest. James listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me carefully. "Bessie," he said, "do you understand that you have significant legal recourse here?" "What do you mean?" "The promissory note securing your $40,000 loan was recorded as a lien against the property. When your son sold the house without satisfying that debt, he violated the terms of the note. You have grounds for both breach of contract and conversion." I felt a flutter of something in my chest. Not quite hope, but something stronger than resignation. "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means you can sue for the full amount of the loan plus interest, plus damages. And because the debt was secured by real property, you may be able to attach other assets to satisfy the judgment." "What other assets?" James smiled grimly. "Well, let's see what your son and daughter-in-law have left after their spending spree." Over the next hour, James explained my options in detail. I could file a civil lawsuit seeking repayment of the loan plus interest and damages. I could also pursue criminal charges for theft by conversion, since they'd sold property that was partially mine without my consent. "But James," I said, "I don't want to destroy my son's life. I just want him to understand that actions have consequences. Sometimes, Bessie, the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices." I thought about that as I drove home. Was I protecting Terrence by allowing Lennox to manipulate him? Was I enabling his poor decisions by always being there to catch him when he fell? By the time I got home, I'd made my decision. I called James Crawford and told him to file the lawsuit. Not just against Lennox, but against both of them. They were married, they'd made the decision together to sell the house, and they would face the consequences together. Then I did something else. I called a locksmith and had all my locks changed. I installed a security system with cameras that would record anyone who approached my property. I wasn't going to be caught off guard again. That afternoon, Terrence called. "Mom, Lennox made bail. We need to talk." "No, we don't." "Mom, please. She's sorry about hitting you. She was just upset." "Terrence, your wife stole $40,000 from me and then assaulted me when I refused to house you both after you squandered over $500,000. There's nothing to talk about." "What do you mean stole $40,000? I explained about the promissory note, about the lien on the house, about the lawsuit I'd filed that morning. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. "Mom," he finally said, his voice shaking, "you can't sue us. We're family." "You're right, Terrence. We are family. Which is why what you did hurts so much worse than if a stranger had stolen from me. We didn't steal from you. You sold a house that had a $40,000 lien on it without paying me back. What would you call that?" Another long silence. "How much are you suing for?" $40,000 plus 3 years of interest, plus legal fees, plus damages for conversion and breach of contract. My attorney estimates the total at around $60,000. We don't have $60,000. You should have thought of that before you let your wife spend your entire future on jewelry and spa treatments. Mom, please, can't we work something out? Maybe we can pay you back slowly, over time? You mean like the original promissory note said? The one you ignored for 3 years before selling the house? I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the phone. Where are you staying? I asked. A motel, the cheapest one we could find. How long can you afford to stay there? Maybe a week. 2 weeks if we're careful. And then what? I don't know, Mom. I really don't know. For a moment, I almost weakened. This was my son, my baby, and he sounded so lost and scared. But then I remembered Lennox's hand striking my face, and my resolve strengthened. Terrence, I love you. I have always loved you, and I always will. But I will not be manipulated, stolen from, or assaulted. If you want a relationship with me, you need to take responsibility for your choices and the consequences that come with them. What does that mean? It means you need to decide what's more important to you, your relationship with your wife or your relationship with your mother, because right now, you can't have both. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking as I set the phone down. Outside, the sun was setting over my quiet neighborhood. Patterson was watering her flowers, and the Johnson boy was riding his bicycle in circles in their driveway. Everything looked normal, peaceful. But I knew that nothing would ever be normal again. Tomorrow, Terrence and Lennox would receive the legal papers. They would realize that their actions had real consequences, and I would find out once and for all whether the son I'd raised still existed somewhere inside the man Lennox had created. 3 days after I filed the lawsuit, James Crawford called me with news that made my blood run cold. Bessie, I need you to sit down, he said. My investigator has been looking into your daughter-in-law's background, and we've uncovered some things you need to know. I was already sitting at my kitchen table, but I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of things? Lennox has a pattern of this behavior. Before she married your son, she was engaged to 2 other men. Both relationships ended when the men discovered she'd been using their credit cards without permission. In one case, she ran up over $50,000 in debt before the man found out. My heart sank. Does Terrence know this? I don't think so. She's very good at covering her tracks. But there's more. The boutique she invested in? It doesn't exist. My investigator couldn't find any business license, any storefront, any evidence that this boutique is anything more than a way for her friend to get $300,000 for free. I felt sick. So the money is just gone? It appears so. And Bessie, there's something else, something worse. I braced myself. She's been having an affair for at least 6 months, possibly longer. The man is married, wealthy, and she's been using your son's money to fund their relationship. The expensive jewelry, the spa trips, the car detailing, it was all part of maintaining her relationship with this other man. The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. My son, my decent, hard-working son, had been completely destroyed by a woman who was using him as an ATM while cheating on him with someone else. Does my son know about the affair? I don't believe so, but Bessie, the man she's been seeing, he's ending the relationship. My investigator spoke to his wife, who found out about the affair and gave him an ultimatum. That's why Lennox is suddenly desperate for money and a place to stay. Her sugar daddy cut her off. I closed my eyes, processing this information. Everything made sense now. The sudden urgency to sell the house, the reckless spending spree, the desperation when I refused to let them stay with me. Lennox wasn't just irresponsible with money. She was a predator who had systematically destroyed my son's life to fund her affair. What do we do with this information? I asked. We use it. In the lawsuit, we can argue that the money was obtained through fraud and deception. We can also use it to ensure your son understands exactly who he married. That afternoon, the process server delivered the legal papers to the motel where Terrence and Lennox were staying. I knew because Terrence called me 30 minutes later, his voice shaking with rage. Mom, what the hell is this? It's a lawsuit, Terrence. I told you I was going to file it. $67,000? You're suing us for $67,000? That's what you owe me, plus interest, plus legal fees, plus damages. We don't have $67,000. I know. That's what happens when you steal from family to fund a lifestyle you can't afford. We didn't steal from you. Terrence, you sold a house that had a $40,000 lien on it without paying me back. In legal terms, that's conversion of secured property. I could hear Lennox in the background, screaming something I couldn't quite make out. She wants to know if you've lost your mind, Terrence said. Tell your wife that I'm completely sane. I'm also completely done being stolen from and assaulted. Mom, please, can't we work something out? Maybe we can— No, Terrence. The time for working things out was 3 years ago when you first missed a payment on the promissory note, or it was 6 months ago when you decided to sell the house, or it was last week when you showed up at my door asking for help after squandering over $500,000. The time for working things out has passed. What do you want us to do? We're living in a motel. I want you to get jobs and start taking responsibility for the mess you've made. Lennox can't work. She's never had a job. Then it's time for her to learn. Mom, you don't understand. She's not capable of working some minimum wage job. She's what, Terrence? Too good to work? Too special to contribute to her own survival? The silence stretched between us. Finally, Terrence spoke, his voice quieter now. She says she'll countersue, for emotional distress or something. I almost laughed. Let her try. I have witnesses to her assaulting me. And I have documentation of every dollar she stole. What does she have? More screaming in the background. Then Terrence came back on the line. She wants to know why you're doing this to us. Because you both need to learn that actions have consequences. And Terrence, there's something else you need to know about your wife. What? I hesitated. This was the moment of truth. The moment when I would either save my son or lose him forever. She's been having an affair. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. What did you say? Lennox has been having an affair for at least 6 months. The man is wealthy and married. She's been using your money to fund their relationship. That's not true. It is true. My attorney hired an investigator. We have proof. You hired an investigator to spy on my wife? I hired an investigator to find out where $600,000 went. The affair was just what we discovered in the process. More silence. Then, in the background, I heard Lennox's voice clearly for the first time. What is she saying? What lies is she telling you about me? She says you're having an affair, Terrence said, his voice hollow. The explosion that followed was audible even through the phone. Lennox screamed denials, accusations, threats. She called me every name in the book and a few I'd never heard before. Terrence, I said quietly. Ask her about Richard Hawthorne. The screaming stopped abruptly. Who is Richard Hawthorne? Terrence asked. Ask your wife. I heard muffled conversation. Then Terrence came back on the line. She says she doesn't know anyone by that name. He's 52 years old, owns a construction company, drives a black Mercedes. He's been paying for her jewelry and spa trips for months. His wife found out about the affair last week and made him end it. The phone went quiet again. This time, the silence stretched for almost a full minute. Terrence, are you there? How do you know all this? Because I hired professionals to find out where your money went. And what we discovered is that your wife has been systematically destroying your life to fund an affair with a married man who just dumped her. She's saying it's not true. Of course she is. What did you expect her to say? She's crying now. She's manipulating you. Again. Mom, I can't. I need to think. Think about this, Terrence. Think about how she convinced you to sell your house without discussing it with me first, even though I had a legal interest in the property. Think about how she spent $600,000 in a few months while you were at work, trusting her to make responsible decisions. Think about how she slapped your mother in front of the entire neighborhood and then expected you to defend her. I'm hanging up now. Terrence, wait! But the line went dead. I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone, wondering if I'd just saved my son or lost him forever. Either way, I'd told him the truth. What he did with that information was up to him. The next morning, James Crawford called again. Bessie, I have an update. Your son called my office this morning. He wants to meet. Meet about what? He didn't say specifically, but he sounded different. Defeated, maybe. Or awakened. It's hard to tell. We arranged to meet at James's office that afternoon. I arrived early, nervous about seeing Terrence again. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. He'd always been thin, but now he looked gaunt. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look 10 years older. "Hello, Mom," he said quietly, taking the chair across from me. "Hello, Terrence." James sat behind his desk, legal pad ready. "Terrence, you said you wanted to discuss the lawsuit?" "I want to know exactly what my wife has done," Terrence said. "I want to see all the evidence." For the next hour, James laid out everything his investigator had discovered. The affair with Richard Hawthorne, documented through hotel receipts and credit card statements. The fake boutique investment that was nothing more than a way to funnel money to Lennox's friend. The pattern of financial deception with previous boyfriends. The mounting credit card debt that Terrence hadn't known about. With each revelation, I watched my son shrink further into his chair. By the time James finished, Terrence was staring at his hands, silent tears streaming down his face. "Where is she now?" I asked gently. "At the motel. She doesn't know I'm here." "What are you going to do?" Terrence looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I don't know, Mom. I honestly don't know. My whole life, everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my wife. It's all been a lie. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I truly am. She's been stealing from me for years, not just spending money, actively deceiving me, lying to me, cheating on me. And when you tried to warn me, I chose her over you. You were manipulated by someone who's very good at manipulation. It's not your fault, isn't it? I'm 35 years old, Mom. I should have seen the signs. I should have questioned why she never wanted to work, why she always needed more money, why she was so eager to sell the house." James cleared his throat. "Terrence, the question now is what you want to do about the lawsuit. Your mother is entitled to the money you owe her, but we could potentially work out a payment plan if—" "No," Terrence interrupted. "She deserves to be paid back immediately, all of it. Son, you just said you don't have the money. I'll get it. I'll take out a loan, work extra hours, sell whatever I need to sell. Mom, you've been trying to protect me my whole life, and I repaid you by letting my wife steal from you and assault you." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I won't fight the lawsuit. You deserve every penny." I felt my own eyes filling with tears. "Terrence, and Mom, I want you to know that I'm filing for divorce. Today, I can't stay married to someone who's been lying to me about everything." The relief I felt was overwhelming. "What about Lennox? What will she do?" Terrence's face hardened. "That's not my problem anymore. She's an adult who made her own choices. Let her figure out how to live with the consequences." As we left James's office, Terrence and I walked to our cars together. At my car, he stopped and turned to me. "Mom, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've hurt you in ways that might not be fixable. But I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make this right." I reached out and touched his cheek, the way I used to when he was little and needed comfort. "You already are making it right, sweetheart. You already are." As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not just hope that I'd get my money back, but hope that I'd gotten my son back too. But I also knew that Lennox wouldn't go quietly. A woman who'd spent years manipulating and deceiving wouldn't just accept defeat. She would fight back. And when she did, it would probably get ugly. I was right to be worried. The real battle was just beginning. I should have known Lennox wouldn't accept defeat gracefully. 3 days after Terrence filed for divorce, she showed up at my house at 6 a.m, pounding on my door like a woman possessed. I looked through the peephole and saw her standing on my porch in yesterday's clothes, her hair disheveled, mascara streaked down her cheeks. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Bessie!" she screamed, loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood. "I know you're in there. Open this door right now." I didn't move. My new security system was recording everything, and I had no intention of letting her into my house. "You destroyed my marriage!" she continued screaming. "You turned my husband against me with your lies." Mrs. Patterson's porch light came on across the street. The Johnsons' dog started barking. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police again if necessary. "I'm not leaving until you talk to me," Lennox shrieked. "You owe me that much." I pressed the intercom button on my security system. "Lennox, you need to leave my property immediately or I'm calling the police." "Good. Call them. Let them hear how you destroyed an innocent woman's life." "Innocent. The word would have been laughable if the situation weren't so pathetic. "You have 30 seconds to get off my property," I said through the intercom. "No, I'm not going anywhere until you admit what you've done." I dialed 911 and gave them my address. "This is Bessie Mitchell on Elm Street. The woman who assaulted me last week is back on my property, refusing to leave and causing a disturbance." The dispatcher assured me officers were on their way. Lennox must have heard me talking because her pounding became more frantic. "You can't hide behind the police forever, Bessie. Everyone needs to know what kind of person you really are." Then she did something that shocked even me. She started screaming details about our family situation for the entire neighborhood to hear. "This woman turned her own son against his wife," she yelled at the top of her lungs. "She hired private investigators to spy on us. She's trying to steal our money." I watched through my window as more neighbors came outside to see what was happening. Some were recording with their phones. This was exactly what Lennox wanted. To humiliate me publicly, to make me look like the villain in her twisted story. "She's jealous because her son loves me more than her," Lennox continued. "She can't stand that he chose me, so she's trying to destroy our marriage." The police arrived just as Lennox was starting to elaborate on our financial situation for the entertainment of anyone within a 6-block radius. Officer Martinez was back, along with a male officer I didn't recognize. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said firmly, "you need to calm down and step away from the door." "I'm not doing anything wrong," Lennox protested. "I'm trying to talk to my mother-in-law." "Mrs. Mitchell has asked you to leave her property. You need to comply." "She's destroying my family. She hired investigators to spy on me and my husband." The new officer, whose name tag read Johnson, stepped forward. "Ma'am, what Mrs. Mitchell does with her own money is not your concern. This is her property, and she has the right to ask you to leave. But she's lying about me. She's telling people I'm having an affair." Officer Martinez looked at her notepad. "Ma'am, are you Lennox Mitchell? The woman who was arrested here last week for assault?" "It wasn't assault. It was barely a tap." "You slapped Mrs. Mitchell in the face in front of multiple witnesses. That's assault." I watched from my window as Lennox's composure completely crumbled. She fell to her knees on my porch, sobbing dramatically. "Please," she begged, looking directly at my front door. "Please, Bessie. I have nowhere to go. Terrence kicked me out of the motel. He's filing for divorce. I don't have any money. Please don't do this to me." For just a moment, I felt a twinge of sympathy. Then I remembered the $600,000, the affair with Richard Hawthorne, the fake boutique investment, and my resolve strengthened. Officer Johnson helped Lennox to her feet. "Ma'am, you need to find somewhere else to go. If you come back here, you'll be arrested for trespassing." "Where am I supposed to go?" she wailed. "I don't have anywhere." "That's not Mrs. Mitchell's problem," Officer Martinez said firmly. "You have 5 minutes to get in your car and leave, or we're taking you in." After the police left with Lennox, I called Terrence. He answered on the first ring. "Mom, I heard. I'm so sorry. I told her to stay away from you. Where is she staying?" "I don't know. After I filed for divorce yesterday, I told her she had to leave the motel. I couldn't afford to keep paying for both of us to stay there." "And you have no idea where she went?" "She mentioned maybe staying with her friend, the one with the fake boutique, but honestly, Mom, I don't care. I'm done being responsible for her problems." I felt a surge of pride at hearing the strength in my son's voice. This was the Terrence I'd raised, the one who took responsibility for his actions and didn't make excuses for bad behavior. "How are you managing?" I asked. "I'm staying at a weekly motel across town. It's not fancy, but it's clean, and I can afford it while I figure out my next steps. I've been working overtime trying to save up money to pay you back." "Terrence, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do. Mom, I let my wife steal from you and then stood by while she assaulted you. I need to make this right." That afternoon, James Crawford called with an update. "Bessie, we have a problem. Lennox has hired an attorney. I thought she didn't have any money." She doesn't. But apparently she's found a lawyer willing to work on contingency. They're claiming that your lawsuit is harassment and that you're using the legal system to interfere in their marriage. I felt my blood pressure rise. That's ridiculous. I know it is, but we need to be prepared for a fight. They're also claiming that the promissory note was invalid because your family, and there was no real intention to collect on the debt. There was absolutely an intention to collect. That's why we made it official. I know that, and we can prove it. But Lennox's attorney is good at making bad cases sound reasonable. We need to document everything. Every interaction you've had with them, every payment that was missed, every attempt you made to work with them before filing suit. Over the next week, I compiled everything I could think of. Phone records showing how many times I'd called Terrence about missed payments, only to have Lennox answer and make excuses. Emails I'd sent asking about their financial situation. Receipts showing money I'd lent them over the years for various emergencies that were never repaid. The picture that emerged was clear. I hadn't been a vindictive mother-in-law trying to destroy their marriage. I'd been a concerned parent trying to help my son, only to be systematically deceived and stolen from. But Lennox wasn't finished. 2 days before our court date, she showed up at my workplace. I was a part-time bookkeeper for a small accounting firm, a job I'd taken after retirement to stay busy and supplement my Social Security. I was at my desk, working on month-end reports, when the receptionist called back to tell me I had a visitor. "She says she's your daughter-in-law," Jenny said. "Should I send her back?" My heart sank. "No. Tell her I'm busy and can't see visitors during work hours." A few minutes later, Jenny called again. "She's not leaving. She says she'll wait all day if she has to. She's making other clients uncomfortable." I sighed and walked to the front office. Lennox was sitting in the waiting area, dressed in her most expensive outfit, looking like she was ready for a business meeting rather than whatever confrontation she had planned. "Lennox, you need to leave. This is my workplace. I just want to talk," she said loudly enough for everyone in the office to hear. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I could see my co-workers watching from their desks, curious about the drama unfolding in our usually quiet office. "We have nothing to discuss." "Please, Bessie. I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you and Terrence. But I'm trying to make it right." The sincerity in her voice was so convincing that for a moment, I almost believed her. Then I remembered that this was the same woman who had looked me in the eye and lied about having affairs, spending money, and a dozen other things. "What do you want, Lennox?" "I want to settle the lawsuit. I want to make things right between us." "Fine. Pay me the $67,000 you owe me and I'll drop the suit." "You know I don't have that kind of money." "Then we have nothing to discuss." She stood up, moving closer to me. "Bessie, please. I made mistakes, but I don't deserve to have my life destroyed over them. You destroyed your own life when you decided to steal from family and cheat on your husband." The mask slipped for just a second, and I saw the real Lennox underneath, cold, calculating, dangerous. "Fine," she said quietly. "If that's how you want to play it, then that's how we'll play it. But don't think this is over. I know things about your precious son that would surprise you." "What kind of things?" She smiled, a cruel expression that made my skin crawl. "Let's just say Terrence hasn't been completely honest with you about everything." Before I could ask what she meant, she turned and walked out of the office, leaving me standing there with a growing sense of dread. That evening, I called Terrence and told him about Lennox's visit. "She said she knows things about you that would surprise me." "What did she mean?" Terrence was quiet for a long moment. "Mom, there are some things I never told you. Things I'm not proud of." My heart sank. "What kind of things?" "When Lennox and I were first married, I did some things. Some financial things that weren't completely legal." "What do you mean?" "I falsified some documents to get a better loan rate on our first car. I also didn't report some cash income on our taxes one year. And when we bought the house, I may have inflated my income on the mortgage application." I felt sick. "Terrence, why didn't you tell me this?" "Because I was ashamed. And because Lennox said it was normal, that everyone did things like that." "And she has proof of this?" "She kept copies of everything. She said it was for our records, but now I think she was keeping it as insurance in case I ever tried to leave her." I closed my eyes, understanding the full scope of what we were dealing with. Lennox wasn't just a manipulative spendthrift. She was a criminal who had been systematically compromising my son for years, creating evidence she could use to destroy him if he ever tried to escape. "Terrence, you need to tell James Crawford about this immediately." "Mom, if this comes out, I could go to jail. I could lose my job, my professional license, everything." And if you don't tell him and Lennox uses it against us in court, you'll lose everything anyway. At least this way, we can try to control how it comes out. The next morning, I sat in James Crawford's office with my son as he confessed to his financial crimes. James listened without judgment, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. When Terrence finished, James leaned back in his chair and studied us both. "This is serious," he said finally, "but it's not insurmountable. The statute of limitations has passed on some of these issues, and the others can potentially be resolved through voluntary disclosure and payment of penalties." "What about the lawsuit?" I asked. "The lawsuit just got more complicated, but Bessie, I want you to understand something. Your daughter-in-law isn't just trying to avoid paying you back. She's trying to destroy your son's life as punishment for leaving her. This isn't about money anymore. This is about control." As we left James's office, I realized that the real battle was just beginning. Lennox had shown her true colors, and she was willing to destroy everyone around her, rather than accept responsibility for her actions. But I wasn't the same woman who had opened her door to them 3 weeks ago. I was stronger now, angrier, and absolutely determined to protect my son from the monster he had married. The war was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like we might actually win. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and tired. I sat behind James Crawford's table, my hands folded in my lap, watching as Lennox entered with her attorney, a sharp-dressed woman in her 40s who looked like she charged by the minute. Lennox had clearly spent money she didn't have on her appearance for court. Her hair was freshly styled, her makeup perfect, and she wore a conservative blue dress that probably cost more than I made in a week. She was playing the role of the wronged daughter-in-law, the victim of a vindictive mother-in-law's harassment. Terrence sat beside me, looking nervous but determined. Over the past week, he'd worked with James to voluntarily disclose his financial irregularities to the appropriate authorities. It would mean paying penalties and potentially losing his current job, but it also meant Lennox couldn't use the information to destroy him. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Patricia Hendricks entered. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the kind of stern expression that suggested she'd heard every sob story in the book. Lennox's attorney, Ms. Sarah Chen, went first. She painted a picture of a young woman trapped in an impossible situation, victimized by a mother-in-law who had never accepted her and was now using the legal system to interfere in their marriage. "Your Honor," Ms. Chen said in a voice dripping with sympathy, "my client made some poor financial decisions, as many young people do, but Mrs. Mitchell's response has been disproportionate and vindictive. She hired private investigators to spy on my client, encouraged her son to file for divorce, and is now trying to extract money from a woman who has no means to pay. She made Lennox sound like an innocent victim who had maybe spent a little too much money on clothes, rather than a woman who had systematically stolen over $600,000 while conducting an affair." When it was James's turn, he methodically laid out the facts. The $40,000 loan, documented in a legally binding promissory note. The 3 years of missed payments, despite repeated attempts to collect. The sale of the house without satisfying the lien. The assault that had been witnessed by multiple neighbors. "Your Honor," James said, "this is not a case of a vindictive mother-in-law harassing her daughter-in-law. This is a case of a woman who has been systematically defrauded by someone who viewed her as an easy mark." Then he did something I wasn't expecting. He called Richard Hawthorne as a witness. I turned to see a middle-aged man in an expensive suit entering the courtroom, his face grim. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Under oath, Richard confirmed the affair. He testified that Lennox had told him she was getting divorced, that she had money from her family, and that she needed help maintaining her lifestyle during the separation. He had paid for jewelry, vacations, and expensive dinners, believing she was a wealthy woman going through a difficult divorce. "She told me her husband was abusive and that his mother was trying to steal her inheritance," Richard testified, not looking at Lennox. "She said she needed money to fight them in court." Lennox's face had gone completely white. Her attorney was frantically scribbling notes, clearly not having expected this testimony. "Did you know that Mrs. Lennox Mitchell was using money from the sale of her marital home to fund your relationship? James asked. No, I did not. If I had known, I never would have participated. And when did this relationship end? Last month. My wife discovered the affair and threatened to leave me if I didn't end it immediately. When James finished with Richard, Ms. Chen tried to minimize the damage. She argued that the affair was irrelevant to the financial dispute, that whatever mistakes Lennox had made in her personal life didn't negate the fact that the lawsuit was excessive. But Judge Hendricks looked unimpressed. When Ms. Chen sat down, the judge leaned forward and studied the paperwork in front of her. Ms. Mitchell, she said, addressing Lennox directly, do you dispute that you signed the promissory note agreeing to repay Mrs. Mitchell $40,000? No, Your Honor, but do you dispute that you failed to make any payments on this note for 3 years? The circumstances were, do you dispute that you and your husband sold the house that secured this loan without paying off the debt? Lennox's attorney stood up. Your Honor, my client was not personally responsible for— Sit down, counselor. I'm asking your client direct questions. Lennox looked like she was about to cry. Your Honor, I didn't understand the legal implications. Mrs. Mitchell, you're 32 years old. Are you claiming you didn't understand that borrowing money meant you had to pay it back? It wasn't supposed to be a real loan. It was family money. Judge Hendricks's expression grew even sterner. Mrs. Mitchell, do you see your signature on this promissory note? Yes, but did anyone force you to sign it? No, but then it's a real loan, regardless of your family relationship. The judge then turned her attention to the assault charge. She had Mrs. Patterson testify about what she'd witnessed, and the police officers who had responded to the call. When Ms. Chen tried to argue that it was just a family dispute that got out of hand, Judge Hendricks cut her off. Counselor, assault is assault. The relationship between the parties is irrelevant. Finally, James presented evidence of Lennox's spending patterns, the jewelry purchases, the spa treatments, the fake boutique investment. He showed how over $600,000 had been spent in less than 6 months, with no assets to show for it. Your Honor, James said, this isn't a case of poor financial management. This is a case of systematic fraud. Mrs. Lennox Mitchell used her husband's money to fund an extramarital affair while deliberately avoiding her legal obligations to my client. When both sides had presented their cases, Judge Hendricks called a brief recess. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, trying to process everything I'd heard. The full scope of Lennox's deception was even worse than I'd imagined. When court resumed, Judge Hendricks had clearly made her decision. Mrs. Lennox Mitchell, she began, I have never seen such a clear-cut case of financial fraud and manipulation. You borrowed $40,000 from your husband's mother, agreed to specific repayment terms, then spent 3 years avoiding your obligations while spending over $600,000 on personal luxuries and an extramarital affair. Lennox started crying, but Judge Hendricks wasn't finished. When confronted about your behavior, you physically assaulted the woman you had stolen from and attempted to manipulate the legal system to avoid the consequences of your actions. She turned to her paperwork. I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff. Mrs. Lennox Mitchell, you are ordered to pay Mrs. Bessie Mitchell the full amount of $67,000 within 30 days. If you fail to comply, I will authorize wage garnishment and asset seizure. Lennox's sobbing grew louder. Furthermore, Judge Hendricks continued, I am forwarding this case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal fraud charges. The systematic deception and theft demonstrated in this case goes far beyond a civil matter. Ms. Chen stood up quickly. Your Honor, my client has no assets with which to pay this judgment. Then your client should have thought about that before spending over $600,000 on jewelry and spa treatments. This court will not reward financial fraud with sympathy. As we left the courthouse, Lennox was still crying in the hallway, her attorney trying to calm her down. She looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, she hissed as I walked past. You think you've won, but this isn't over. I stopped and looked at her, really looked at her, for what I knew would be the last time. Yes, Lennox, I said quietly, it is over. It's been over since the moment you raised your hand to me. 3 months later, I was sitting on my back porch, watching the sun set over my garden, when Terrence called. Mom, I have news. Lennox's friend, the one with the fake boutique, was arrested today for fraud. Apparently, Lennox wasn't her only victim. She'd been running investment scams for years. Will that help you get any of the money back? Probably not. The money's gone. But it means Lennox might be facing criminal charges too if they can prove she knew it was a scam. And how are you doing? Better. I found a new job. It pays less than my old one, but it's honest work. And they knew about my legal issues when they hired me. I'm in a small apartment now, nothing fancy, but it's mine. Are you happy? There was a long pause. You know what, Mom? I think I am. For the first time in years, I wake up in the morning and don't have to wonder what financial disaster is waiting for me. I know exactly how much money I have, exactly what I owe, exactly what I can afford. It's liberating. What about the $67,000 you owe me? I've been making payments every month, just like I promised. It'll take me a few years, but I'll pay back every penny. Terrence, you don't have to. Yes, I do. It's not just about the money, Mom. It's about showing you that I'm the man you raised me to be. After I hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness, thinking about the past few months. I'd gotten my money back. Well, most of it. More importantly, I'd gotten my son back. Lennox was facing criminal charges in 3 different jurisdictions. Richard Hawthorne's wife had filed for divorce and was seeking half of everything he owned. The fake boutique investigation had expanded into a multi-state fraud case. Everyone who had participated in the deception was facing consequences, while I was sitting peacefully in my garden, surrounded by the life I'd built through honest work and careful saving. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I almost didn't read it, but something made me look. I know where you live. This isn't over. I looked at the message for a long moment, then blocked the number and deleted the text. Lennox could threaten me all she wanted from whatever jail cell or courtroom she was facing. I had cameras, I had security, I had the law on my side, and I had the unshakable knowledge that I had done the right thing. A year later, I sold my house and moved to a retirement community in Arizona. It was warm and peaceful, with a garden club and a book club and neighbors who had lived full lives and appreciated simple pleasures. I bought a small condo with a view of the mountains and spent my mornings tending to my new garden and my afternoons reading by the pool. Terrence visited twice a month, flying out from Chicago where he'd found steady work and genuine friends. He never mentioned Lennox, and I never asked. Some chapters in life need to be closed completely before new ones can begin. One evening, as I was watering my roses, my neighbor Margaret called over the fence. "Bessie, there's someone at your door. A young woman. She looks upset." My heart skipped a beat, but when I walked around to the front of my condo, I saw it wasn't Lennox. It was a woman in her 20s with brown hair and tired eyes. "Mrs. Mitchell? My name is Jennifer. I know this is strange, but I need to talk to you about Lennox." I studied her face, seeing something familiar in her features. "How do you know Lennox? She's my sister, and she's been doing to other families what she did to yours." We sat on my small patio as Jennifer told me her story. Lennox had moved to Florida after the criminal charges in Chicago, using a different name and a carefully crafted sob story about being victimized by her ex-husband's family. She was engaged to another wealthy man, spinning the same lies about needing money to fight false accusations. "I've been trying to warn people," Jennifer said, "but she's very convincing. She makes everyone believe she's the victim. What do you want from me? Help. You're the only person who's ever successfully stood up to her and won. I need to know how you did it." I made us both tea and told Jennifer everything. The investigation, the lawsuit, the importance of documenting everything and never backing down. "The key," I said finally, "is understanding that you can't save someone from their own choices. You can only protect yourself and the people you care about." Jennifer stayed for dinner, and we talked until late in the evening about family, manipulation, and the courage it takes to do the right thing when the right thing is hard. After she left, I sat on my patio looking up at the Arizona stars, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd thought my life was simple and settled. I'd had no idea that my greatest challenge, and my greatest victory, was still ahead of me. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones you never wanted to fight, fought against people you never wanted to hurt, in defense of principles you never thought you'd have to defend. But when those battles come, you have 2 choices. Fight or surrender everything you've worked for to people who see your kindness as weakness. I chose to fight. And in fighting, I discovered that at 64 years old, I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. The roses in my garden were blooming beautifully, their petals soft and fragrant in the desert evening. Like me, they had survived transplanting and were thriving in new soil. Some things, I realized, grow stronger when they're forced to put down new roots. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.